So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And hi to everyone who's going to be watching this at home later. This evening's presentation is called Responding to Climate Change, and we'll be discussing Dalton's forthcoming green infrastructure plan and giving you some personal emergency preparedness tips. So the agenda for tonight's presentation will be a brief project overview, followed by a discussion of the basics of green infrastructure and local climate change impacts, followed by updates on Dalton's green infrastructure planning process, followed by some time for a Q&A, and then we'll finish out with personal emergency preparedness tips. So in 2019, Dalton participated in a planning process called Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. Workshops were held with town residents, business owners, municipal employees to figure out a plan that would make Dalton less vulnerable to climate change and related disasters. So workshop participants identified several priorities for the town were the following: implementing green infrastructure in areas in town that are vulnerable to flooding, improving stormwater infrastructure throughout town, floodproofing public housing and protecting the town's most vulnerable residents, and providing community-wide emergency preparedness education. So tonight's presentation is part of a larger effort by the town of Dalton and BRPC to increase the town's climate change and disaster preparedness through the development of a town-wide green infrastructure plan, addressing flooding at Walker Brook, and increasing emergency preparedness among residents. So tonight we're going to introduce you to the plan, walk you through some emergency preparedness to keep yourself and your family safe during a disaster.
You're muted.
See, I clicked one button. It was just the wrong button. Thank you. My name is Courteny Morehouse. I'm with Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. I'm on the Energy and Environmental team. So I'm going to present some of the elements of the Green Infrastructure Plan, give you an overview, and then dive into some of the specific conceptual designs that we've come up with, so that you can both give input, but also ask any questions as we go. And this is really at the conceptual level. So if there's any feedback you can provide, we'd love to have it now as we move forward. So first off, what is green infrastructure? To answer that question, we sort of need to go back and explain how our traditional stormwater infrastructure has been built, which we'll call gray infrastructure. And when it was built, the idea behind our historical stormwater infrastructure was to really quickly drain water off of roads and paved areas, and into pipes, which then often lead to streams or rivers. There's a lot of issues with this type of infrastructure, which we'll get into. As counter to that, we've come up with green infrastructure, which really utilizes plants, soil, and natural elements to store, recycle, and also filter a lot of the water. So this is sort of a diagram of what these two systems look like. On the left, you'll see gray infrastructure and how the storm drains really lead to pipes underground, which then lead to the degraded, well, it says here degraded river, depending on how much pervious pavement, in fact, might be degraded. Green infrastructure really works in collaboration with gray infrastructure often, and it sort of intercepts that direct feed into the stream by introducing green spaces, whether that's a grassy swale or vegetated plantings, to really capture some of that storm water and allow it to infiltrate through a more natural process through roots and soil, etc. And then excess water may then in fact go through the gray infrastructure system. So often we build these things alongside each other to mitigate some of the impacts of stormwater. One of the key things about green infrastructure is that we're trying to reduce impervious surfaces and increase the amount of pervious surfaces throughout a developed area. So impervious surfaces, for those who don't know, are basically any place where water cannot flow through. So think pavement, roads, parking lots, buildings, anywhere where if you were to pour a bottle of water on it, it would run off of it rather than through it. By contrast, obviously, pervious surface is where water runs through it. So green infrastructure increases the amount of pervious surface and especially increases it in between some of these impervious areas, sort of interrupting that amount of water that's going into that stormwater system. So some of the benefits of green infrastructure, and there are many, so I sort of just highlighted the top ones. Because it's capturing the stormwater, it's really storing it and holding it back. Oftentimes this means that it slows the flow by retaining some of the volume. And often green infrastructure was built with rocks or some other way of actually slowing the velocity of stormwater. So this is especially important when there's a lot of volume happening all at once in more extreme storms. In effect, what that does is reduce flooding quite often. It also recharges the groundwater, which can then reduce drought, right? So it introduces soil and plants where there was traditionally impervious surface, and it sort of increases the amount of groundwater in our aquifers. It also can then filter pollutants. So again, we're sort of using soil and plants where we traditionally had pipes. And those plants, the soil, the microbes in the soil, all work to eliminate a lot of the pollutants that come with stormwater, including fertilizers from our lawns, grass clippings that carry with it nitrogen and phosphorus itself. Oils even can be removed from a lot of stormwater through the use of just soil and plants. And then the other thing it can do, depending on the type of structure you install, is restore habitat. So a lot of green infrastructure structures will introduce plants, which if you choose the right types of plants, that can be a pollinator garden. It can restore habitat for birds, that sort of thing. So it has the potential to do quite a bit. And you can see here, I sort of introduced why we're particularly doing it here in Dalton. This is the picture of the old high school, or I guess it also used to be a middle school, during, I think what Dan said is the 1981, a flood in 1981. And I think these are the janitors trying to get into the building. Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what we're trying to avoid by introducing more green infrastructure into the town.
This picture was people who lived in the neighborhood on a rowboat.
Ah,
We're still getting our hands on the picture manned by Cliff Grace, was the janitor. He had the photo of them in a rowboat going through the lower corridors of the building.
yeah, I'd
But
love to see that.
This was in the 1980s.
Great, thank you.
It might be good to point out that Walker Brook is confined to an underground channel at this point.
Yes, we will get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. You're preempting my presentation. So why are we doing this particularly now? Well, climate change changes everything, right? With warmer weather, we're going to see more vapor in the air. That means more rain, in particular, more frequent flooding, more intense storms, more frequent rain, more intense rain, and also a longer duration of the rain that we will get. This is especially true in the Northeast. Since the last few decades, we have actually had a recorded more amount of rain compared to the rest of the United States, right? This is only going to increase. I think the current predictions from NOAA is that in a high emission scenario, we could get as much as 40% more rain. So we're looking at about 2 to 3 inches by the 2030s, and then an inch more after that every decade. So we're just looking at a lot more rain in our region, and that means more floods. But it conversely also means more drought. So we're going to have less snow, and often in the Berkshires and as much of the Northeast, a lot of our groundwater recharges through the slow melting of snowpack. Slow melting of snowpack. I think I said that right the first time, but we'll just do it again. So without that snowpack being such high volume, we're going to have more drought. And then we're also going to get probably more rain all at once and then long periods of no rain. So we're going to have to sort of prepare for both scenarios. Green infrastructure allows us to recharge and capture some of the rainwater when it does happen. So it kind of refills some of the aquifers. So It can do both things. It can both reduce the flooding and also recharge the groundwater. So where would this go? So in the plan, we looked at 23 sites throughout Dalton. We looked at Walker Brook watershed, which you'll see the sort of, if they're very faint, so I apologize you can't see it very clearly, but the blue hatching is the Walker Brook watershed on the right of this map. But we also looked at other developed areas throughout Dalton to see where there might be example projects, where there might be really high viable green infrastructure projects. Of those, 12 were chosen for sort of a preliminary design that we thought were a little more viable. And we did some really preliminary, I would say pre-conceptual designs for those. And then from that, we chose 3 of the top sites that we wanted to move forward to a conceptual design phase. So those 3 top sites are Craneville Elementary School in the middle there, Green Ridge Park down on South Street, and also the Walker Brook region, which we sort of combined into one site, which is the Dalton Senior Center and the old school site. So the first one I'm going to sort of detail the design for is Craneville Elementary. Here we thought this site was a really good site, one, because it's at an elementary school, so there's a lot of educational value, but also there's a portion of the parking lot that is looking like it's in need of repair. So these are always good opportunities. Rather than invest funds in traditional old infrastructure, you could upgrade it and have something that also treats stormwater coming off of the parking lot. So the idea here is to put in 3 different, what we call best management practices, or BMPs. The first one is porous pavement. It works exactly like traditional asphalt, except that water flows through it as opposed to runs off of it. There's a lot of different ways that porous pavement can look, and it's maintained a little differently than asphalt, but it can often function just as well as asphalt. And then on the north side of this parking lot, we suggested that, or we designed in riprap swale, which is basically a depression in the ground in a linear fashion along the parking lot with rocks to slow the flow. And then at the end of these, we have 2 bioretention basins that would capture all the stormwater flowing off of that parking lot, retaining it into some sort of wider depression in the ground with plantings in it. The next project site we looked at was Green Ridge Park, partly because it's a little less busy, we thought, but also still a park. We could put in an infiltration basin that's similar to that bioretention pond, except here we would be looking at making it just a grassy swale for ease of maintenance, and then an infiltration trench to grab some of the stormwater both off the parking lot as well as South Street. And this could be a great pollinator garden with some riprap and rocks to really slow the flow before it goes into the storm drain. Or it could be a grass swale alternative, which again, that would sort of be a choice as to what type of amenities you want. Do you want ease of maintenance, or do you want sort of the habitat value? And then the moment we've all been waiting for, Walker Brook. So the idea here is to add a couple of bioretention basins, and the big sort of change would be to daylight the stream. Daylighting is uncovering or restoring a natural stream channel where it is previously piped. So as most of you know, Walker Brook is above ground north of High Street, and then it gets piped under High Street and goes into the traditional storm sewer system, which runs, I believe, along Field Street, maybe even Glennon Avenue. So this project would be essentially allowing that stream to come above ground, and we would construct a stream channel that starts at the senior center north there, runs through that property, gets culverted underneath that short driveway there, and then goes into another culvert at the corner of First Street and Glennon Avenue. We thought this would be the best way to both mitigate the flooding that's really happening there. And I know there's a lot of concern about the senior center at some point with the next big flood having some flood risk there. So this would allow the stream channel to really absorb some of the natural function of a flood. The bioretention basins would increase the capacity for that stream channel. to absorb excess water. And it would also sort of restore a lot of the habitat value there and be somewhat of a community asset. So that's the theory. This is still very conceptual. And it would have to be a multi-phase project, I think, just depending on cost. But the idea, we wanted to sort of present it here and get as far as we could with this design, so that the next step, which the town has gotten a grant for, is a hydrology and hydraulic study, which will really look at the volume and velocity and all of the hydrology of that area in order to make this possible. And it may look at it looks at the whole system to really see what can be done there. So before I get into timelines, some of the other elements in the plan are recommended policies that the town could consider adopting that would really encourage green infrastructure, ease of green infrastructure installation throughout the town, as well as funding sources that could be utilized to really fund green infrastructure installation at any of these sites. The timeline for this is we're finishing up the plan now. We should have a draft ready by June 30th. At that point, we're going to post it to the town website, and we hope to have the public review it, give us feedback, give us ideas so that we can incorporate them into a final draft. And then we're hoping to have the town adoption in July at the select board meeting. Right now, Dalton has a Walker Brook H&H, or hydrology and hydraulic study. And then we'll use that to really help Dalton do fundraising. And then I sort of put this 2025 date out there, but it could be longer, it could be sooner. It really depends on the fundraising efforts and what we get, but we're hoping to have some project implementation. So I encourage everybody to stay informed, check the town website. BRPC is hoping to help out in any way we can. So please stay in touch with this project.
Courtney, if I may.
Yeah.
The plan for the town right now is that we get the H&H study done, get that work done, and then we would be looking at, right now it would be a part of the BRIC grant program.
Yeah, MEMA.
After that, to do all of the work that needs to be done. So I think the information you're providing would be very helpful to what we're looking to do. So for the fundraising, we're hoping for the federal government to come up money, but it's going to be a 75-25. So, anybody can, we'll have to come up with some money somewhere. So anything you can do could probably be helpful.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely talk more. I feel like we can help out with that. Yeah, totally. So I think that's it for this slide. Yeah. I welcome any questions that you have about this or the MVP process, or maybe, since Dan's on the call, the H&H study as well. Don't forget to unmute yourself. All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, we can move on to emergency preparedness.
Hi, everybody. My name is Allison Egan. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about personal emergency preparedness and some tips, particularly for sheltering in place or going to a local, regional, or state shelter. So as Courtney was saying, climate change is going to increase the number of intense precipitation events. So bigger rainstorms, more intense rainstorms, potentially leading to increased incidence of flooding and need for sheltering in place or activating local, regional, or state shelters. And as Courtney said too, intense precipitation events are increasing, particularly in the Northeast region of the United States. So we have to be pretty keenly prepared for these in Berkshire County. So there's groups of people, this isn't an exhaustive list, but groups of people who are predominantly at risk for natural hazards and the effects, sort of like the recovery effects of disasters. So seniors are a major concern. We want to make sure that their additional needs are taken care of. People experiencing homelessness or living in transient housing. Citizens struggling with addiction, people with chronic health issues, and people living in poverty. And the people who are most at risk are people who have a couple of these going on. So lots of seniors are living in poverty. Lots of people dealing with chronic health issues are also seniors. So we're thinking about all of these complex needs as they are integrated with individuals. So here's a few steps I'm going to cover for preparing yourself and your family for disasters. And we're talking primarily about natural hazards. We're just sort of peaking out of the COVID pandemic, which did have sheltering needs at the beginning. But when we have natural disasters like tropical storms and hurricanes, it's more likely that we'll have to activate short-term sheltering in communities. So we're going to look at being informed, making a plan for you and your family, building an emergency kit, and getting involved if you have the capacity. So one of the most important things that anybody can do to prepare for disasters is know how to be informed before the disaster hits. So paying attention to those severe weather alerts that you probably pretty frequently get alerted for on local news stations, or you might get the updates on your phone telling you about upcoming extreme weather watches or warnings, and what is the difference between watches and warnings. So watch is that there's the potential for intense weather, and then a warning is that that weather is imminent. So the difference between a watch and a warning might make a decision for you about heading out to the store or going out for another purpose or something. So if you see a warning for a flash flood, maybe wait it out to go drive to the grocery store. And you could potentially save yourself a lot of trouble. Signing up for emergency alerts, the town of Dalton uses the reverse 911 system. And that is the best way for the emergency management director, Dan, to get in touch with you to notify you of an imminent disaster or some other emergency happening in town. And generally, if your town has social media accounts, following those before a disaster strikes, favoriting or keeping a list of radio stations that give you local news about your town. And checking the town website frequently for updates. A lot of towns are updating their town websites frequently with good information. And knowing that 911 in the case of an emergency or a disaster will be entirely overwhelmed. So we don't call 911 for information about a disaster. Call for emergencies only. And if you do need to call 911 in the case of an emergency, if the situation you're in gets beyond you and you need additional assistance, being calm, being brief, and being clear is going to be your best bet in getting the help you need. And it's going to make the dispatchers and the whole system work more fluidly. So making a plan and writing that plan down and looking at the plan occasionally to remind yourself of what you planned for is hugely impactful in preparing for disasters and functioning during a disaster. So there is research that shows that people who actually write a plan with their families are more likely to survive disasters and to thrive in the disaster and the recovery phase. And a plan is what's going to actually get you moving. So when a disaster hits, say a tornado hits your town, you're going to be in fight or flight mode in your body, and having this plan in a drawer or in your go kit to refer to is just going to give you comfort and tell you what the next steps are. to take in the disaster. So something we like to recommend that people do is prepare for 72 hours of potentially sheltering in place or sheltering at a local, regional, or state shelter. So ideally, you'd be able to take care of yourself in your home for 72 hours. But again, if you need emergency assistance, or if there is an emergency shelter available that you need, you should go. Things that you might need include food, water, housing, and warmth, safety, communications, evacuation, and transportation means. Health means are medicine and medical equipment. Everybody has different needs. Everybody has different items that they need to function. And if you live in the town of Dalton, you might have received this Plan 9 on the right of the screen in your mail. And this includes the 9 essential items that you need to successfully shelter in place. It's not exhaustive. You can always add more items to your kit, but some of these items that you might not necessarily think about when you're in a disaster and packing a last-minute kit would be things like batteries for the radio or a non-electric can opener. And I will always emphasize to people, if when you're packing your go bag or a bag for the shelter, bring a couple clean pairs of clothes. In a natural hazard, your clothes can get soiled incredibly easily, and having some comfortable, dry, clean clothes to change into once you get to a shelter is going to make your experience much more comfortable and just be a better experience overall for you. So whether you decide to stay at home or leave, you should have family communication plans, shelter in place plans, and evacuation plans. So tips for those emergency plans would to be make a few copies of those plans, keep a copy in your shelter in place kit, your car, and with your support network. So family that doesn't live with you, friends, neighbors that don't live with you, give them a copy of that, especially that communication plan, so they know how to contact you and the people that you take care of or that care for you. Update the plans frequently. Phone numbers change, email addresses change. Rotate the supplies, so water, bottled water, food rations, all of that stuff does go bad at some point, so you want to make sure you're rotating those supplies, and practice the fire drills and practice the communication drills and work out those kinks. And this is especially important if you have kids or elderly that live with you, so that you can make sure that those kinks are worked out and that you've practiced and you've tried it before outside of an emergency. And there's a bunch of excellent plan templates that you can download from the FEMA website. So you can type in a communication plan template or shelter in place plan template, and you'll find a bunch of very, very good templates. Just you can fill them right in. So building a 3 deep personal care network for children, elders, functional needs support services, and pets is so important. You don't want the backup childcare you have to be your neighbor next door and to find out that they've fallen victim to the same flood event or outage that you have, and to not have a backup. So having 2 or 3 backup support network, if you're able to, for each of these additional care items is really important. Get to know your neighbors, doing municipal vulnerability planning all across Berkshire County. The one thing I always hear is that knowing your neighbors has been a matter of life and death for some people, especially in freezing events, ice events, and snow events, where an elderly person might live alone and just not be able to get to their generator outside to turn it on. And that could be the difference of freezing or living comfortably during a disaster. So knowing your neighbors, if you have the capacity, go knock on their door after the immediate threat has passed. And so, and if you need additional support, asking your neighbors to check on you if something happens can really make a huge difference in the event of a disaster. Having a 100-mile emergency contact, so somebody who can know the situation that's going on and make calls for you in the event that you're in a disaster zone and you need things to happen, sharing your plan, and completing the 911 disability indicator form is also a really good tip. You can go find the disability indicator form on the MassGov website and fill it out with any of the additional communication or functional needs that you have. So when 911 gets called to your home, they know, for example, that they already know on their way there that you have hearing loss. And they don't need to work to understand that when you're in a disaster and they're responding to you immediately. They already know when they meet you, you have hearing loss, and they can work with you to mitigate the disaster. So that's a good tip. And then consider your own functional needs when you're sheltering in place or going to a local, regional, or state shelter. You might want, if you're in a wheelchair, you might want some gloves to cover your hands. If your wheelchair is running through water or debris, you might want a patch kit for the wheels on your wheelchair, a cane as a backup if that's available to you. Health, things like medications, allergies, and oxygen if you need those items. Also have a list of your prescriptions and the dosage of those prescriptions and the frequency that you take those prescriptions. So in the event that you lose something or you forgot something, having that list to hand to a pharmacist at the shelter will get you that medication much more quickly. Extra glasses if you can. Bring your hearing aids. Have your smartphone, have a charger for your smartphone, and a translation app if you need assistance with language translation. And then if you do have a developmental disability or you care for somebody with a disability, it's helpful if they carry a card that explains what their needs are and what their communication preferences are. Carry your favorite support items and look for quiet spaces. So when you get to a shelter, if you find that you're extremely uncomfortable or your sensory needs aren't being met, you can request to move your cot location or to go to a quiet room for a period of time. And then just some brief shelter tips. So only go if you don't have other options, but use it if you need to. Take a pillow and blanket. That's just going to add that additional comfort for you and make it just a much better experience, like having a couple sets of dry, clean clothes. Take any special foods you need, your prescriptions, your list of prescriptions, and medical equipment that you need. Have your ID tag, so government issued IDs, and don't take valuables with you. Don't bring jewelry. If you can, leave it home or leave it with a friend or family member before you go to a shelter. And let the shelter registration folks know if you have any additional needs to take care of yourself at the shelter right up front. And then some other information that you are going to want to have in your kit at home and then to bring to a shelter is, again, a photocopy of your ID. Your prescriptions, your doctor's orders, medical records, if you can, and then a list of your prescriptions. Contact list, so family and emergency contacts outside of the state, neighbors, caretakers, preferred funeral home or other pharmacist, vet, doctor for those in your network. Important documents like birth certificates, deeds, having these things copied and stored in a watertight case in the event of a disaster is going to save you a ton of paperwork and lots of trips to the Social Security and DMV and all of the other offices that are just going to be burdensome or heavily burdened themselves after a disaster. And photographs to help people identify your kids, your pets, your house, your car, and your goods. If there's searches going on, if there's reunification that needs to happen with pets and children, this is incredibly important, especially if you have kids that might not be able to communicate their parents' phone numbers or their parents' names or address. Having each member of the family have a copy of photos and information like your home address and emergency contact is going to make separation much shorter than it would otherwise be. And then preparing your pet. So shelters are required to accommodate pets that arrive at the shelter with their owner. And your pet needs an emergency kit too. Your pet needs food. Bring your pet's medical records if you have them, their IDs, harness leashes. That's going to help the people managing the pet area and pet shelter their lives much easier. Water for your pet too, so additional quantities on top of what you pack for yourself. And then we also recommend bringing some, storing away some pet toys, so your animal can find comfort in their displacement too. And then if you have the capacity, if you are safe and your family's safe and your neighbors are safe, consider getting involved, especially with credentialed agencies like the Western Mass Medical Reserve Corps or the MRC, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, or any other volunteer fire or volunteer group in your community. So if you have skills and if you have time and capacity to offer to support a disaster and support the cleanup and support the sheltering, this is an incredibly important thing for you to do if you're able, and that's the only way a community can function and recover from a disaster. And I think that's it. So I'll take any questions too, if you have questions, and thank you.
Is that list available easily online or some other place?
The Plan 9. Yeah, so I think, Dan, we're gonna post it to the emergency management page on the website, and we'll also post all of these slides so you can have all the information that was here too.
Nice, thank you.
If I may, we're also going to see that copies of this information is available in packets at the senior center, and have it on the town social media sites for people to take a look at and to understand. And at any point in time, they can also contact me through the town, and we can provide them additional information.
Great suggestion. We'll definitely get some packets put together for the senior center. All right.
Okay.
Good. Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
Sorry, if there are no more questions, I think we'll say goodnight here. And as we all mentioned, a copy of this presentation, both physical, digital, the recording will all be available in multiple places. And thank you for everyone that participated.
One final question, if I may.
Absolutely.
Would you like me to try to see if we can get the recording played on the town community access TV?
That would be great.
Give me a copy and I'll work on that.
We will.
I'd also like
Yeah.
to suggest that another place to put the packets would be the CRA. The Dalton CRA is often a kind of an important community center. So
Great. Thank you. Be sure to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. Nice job, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.